The night was thick with fog, the kind that swallowed sound and light alike, turning even the brightest street lamps into pale ghosts. Downtown was half asleep, its heartbeat slow and rhythmic, echoing in the distant hum of tires on wet pavement. A lone woman walked briskly along the cracked sidewalk, her heels making soft, sharp clicks that broke the silence. Her name was Danielle Carter, though no one on this block knew that she was the chief of police, the youngest, the first black woman to hold that position in the city's turbulent history. Tonight, she was just another figure in a dark coat, her badge locked in her purse, her gun left at home after a long day of politics and paperwork. She'd spent the last 14 hours diffusing chaos in the station, convincing City Hall to fund community reform, and listening to her officers argue about respect and reputation. All she wanted was to breathe, to walk, to think, to exist without titles or tension. The air was damp with the smell of rain and gasoline. She could hear her own breath, slow but steady, as she crossed under a flickering streetlight. And that was when she heard footsteps behind her. At first, she ignored them. It wasn't unusual people walked late here, though few lingered alone, but the rhythm of these steps changed. They followed hers, then quickened, then stopped when she did. Danielle's instinct, the one honed through decades of patrol, raids, and interrogation rooms, tightened in her chest like a fist. She glanced over her shoulder, casual but alert. Two shadows stood by the alleyway, just out of the light. Young, maybe mid-20s, hooded, watching. The kind of watch that wasn't curious, it was hungry. She turned away, pretending not to notice, and continued walking. Her mind was already calculating nearest exits, nearby businesses, what she could use as a weapon. But she told herself not to overreact. "You're off duty, Danielle. Breathe." The footsteps came again, faster, louder, then split. One to the left, one to the right. Her pulse jumped. She stopped. "You got a problem?" she said, turning sharply. Her voice came out calm but edged with steel. One of them laughed, a short, humorless sound that echoed off the alley walls. "Nah, lady," said the taller one. "We just thought you might need some help walking home." The other chuckled lowly. "Yeah, streets ain't safe this time of night." Danielle took a small step back, her eyes locked on theirs. "Appreciate the concern," she said evenly. "But I can handle myself." The taller one stepped into the light now. His face was young but hardened, jaw tense, eyes darting. He was nervous, but hiding it behind bravado. The second man hovered behind, shifting, glancing up and down the street. They weren't pros. They were desperate. That made them dangerous. "Come on," the tall one said, spreading his hands like he was doing her a favor. "We ain't gonna hurt you. Just give us what you got, and you walk home fine." Danielle's heart pounded, but her expression didn't flinch. She'd seen this scene play out 100 times from the other side of the badge. She knew how fast desperation could turn to violence, but she also knew control. "You really want to do this?" she asked softly. Her voice was quiet, too quiet, and for a moment it unsettled them. "You got no idea who you're talking to." "Lady, I don't care who you are," the shorter one hissed. Just a car passed nearby, its headlights slicing through the fog, and for 1 second their faces were illuminated. Danielle memorized them, every scar, every line. Then the car was gone, leaving only the faint echo of its tires. "Wallet, now," the tall one demanded. Danielle slowly reached into her purse, her mind racing. She had no gun, no badge, just her instincts. She handed him her wallet, keeping her movements smooth. He snatched it, flipping it open. "What's this? Chief of police?" He blinked, then laughed sharply. "You serious?" The shorter one leaned over his shoulder, confused. "Yo, she's a cop?" Danielle's voice dropped to a whisper that carried a strange calm. "I'm the cop." That made them freeze. For a second, fear flickered across their faces. Then, panic. The tall one threw the wallet at her chest. "You think that scares us?" he barked, trying to reclaim control. "You ain't got no badge on you. You're just some woman out here alone." Danielle didn't move. Her breath was slow. "You're right," she said. "Tonight I am." The silence that followed was suffocating. The shorter man shifted nervously. "Man, let's just go," he muttered. But the tall one hesitated, his pride wounded, his fear tangled in his arrogance. He took a step forward. Danielle didn't flinch. "You need to walk away," she said softly. "Now." Her voice was no longer a plea, it was an order. The kind that came from years of command. Something in her tone broke through the fog. The tall one's eyes flickered with confusion, like he wasn't sure why he suddenly wanted to listen. But then a noise behind them, maybe a trash can tipping over, maybe fate itself, snapped him back. "Come on," he hissed, and they ran. Their footsteps faded into the night, leaving Danielle standing under the broken light, her breath finally catching up to her pulse. For a long moment she just stood there, trembling not from fear, but fury. Not at them, but at herself. She'd let her guard down. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be powerless, and that more than anything she could never forgive. When she finally picked up her wallet, she stared at her badge through the cracked plastic window. The gold gleam reflected the dim light, warped by a spiderweb of cracks. It looked almost symbolic. She closed it tightly in her fist, whispering to herself, "You just made a mistake you'll regret." By the time she reached her car, rain had started to fall. Slow at first, then steady. The rhythm matched the beat of her thoughts, cold, measured, relentless. She drove home in silence, but her mind replayed every detail, the voices. The smell of cheap cologne. The hesitation in the tall one's tone when he'd seen her badge. They weren't random. No, something felt off. Too deliberate. Too convenient. It wasn't a coincidence that the city as police chief had been cornered just blocks from the precinct. Not a coincidence at all. When she pulled into her driveway, she didn't even turn off the engine. She sat there, staring into the night. She thought of the press, the politicians, the department. If anyone found out, she'd look weak, vulnerable. The vultures in City Hall would love that, but this wasn't about politics anymore. This was personal. Her phone buzzed Detective Ramirez. She hesitated, then answered. "Chief? Sorry, I know it's late," Ramirez said. "We just got to call 2 suspects matching a robbery description over near." "I know," she interrupted softly. "I already met them." Silence. "You what?" "Don't worry about it," she said. "I'll handle it." "Chief, protocol says Ramirez." Her tone silenced him instantly. Not a word to anyone. "You understand?" "Yes, ma'am." She hung up, tossed the phone aside, and leaned back in her seat. The rain thickened, drumming against the windshield like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You wanted to scare me? Now I'm coming for you." The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back slowly, her car's taillights glowing red in the rain, the thunder rumbling in the distance, her reflection staring coldly through the glass. The night had taken her peace. She would take back control. And in the dark city streets, 2 young men had no idea that they had just made enemies with the most powerful woman in law enforcement, a woman who had built her career on tracking monsters. Now she was hunting them. The next morning, the city felt heavier, as though the fog from the night before had seeped into every alley and office, clinging to the walls and the air. Danielle Carter woke early, the weight of sleepless hours etched into her face, but the fire inside her had only grown stronger. She didn't need her uniform today. She needed her mind. Coffee in hand, she sat at her kitchen table, the wallet from last night laid out in front of her. The suspects' faces were burned into her memory, the taller one with a crooked scar above his eyebrow, the shorter one with a nervous twitch when he spoke. She replayed the scene in her head over and over, noting every hesitation, every glance. Something didn't add up. Professional thugs don't hesitate like that. They had been sloppy, but deliberate. She reached for her phone and pulled up the city's surveillance grid, her badge at opening doors she didn't even have to knock on. Cameras along the streets they had fled were already pulling data. She pinpointed the exact alley where the encounter happened and watched the footage in slow motion. 2 shadows emerged from the mist, moving in chaotic yet cautious patterns, eyes darting, heads low. Danielle's mind was a machine now, every second ticking with precision. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered, her voice cutting through the silence. She made a list, analyzing their movements and likely hideouts. Her heart pounded, but it was methodical, controlled. She had been trained to make fear her tool, not her master. By mid-morning, she was out of her apartment, dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, blending with the city crowd. No one suspected the chief of police walked among them. Here, she was just another woman moving with purpose. As she approached the first location on her list, a rundown convenience store tucked between a laundromat and a pawnshop, she noticed a group of teenagers loitering. Not thugs, but informants, maybe? She approached them subtly, leaning against a lamppost. "You see anything strange last night?" she asked casually, keeping her voice low. They glanced at each other, uncertain, then nodded toward the alley across the street. "Some guys ran down there. Looked freaked, man. Like they stole something and got caught," one said. Danielle's lips pressed together. Not random at all. They weren't professionals. They were desperate men, and someone had sent them. She made a mental note to trace who might be orchestrating it. Hours passed in surveillance and analysis, her mind racing faster than the cars in traffic. By afternoon, she had pieced together a pattern. The two thugs were local, but someone higher up was manipulating them. Someone knew the chief's movements. That realization struck a chord deep inside her. This wasn't just robbery, it was a warning. And that meant her enemy was someone daring enough to challenge the law itself. She pulled up the city database on her phone, scanning records, contacts, and known criminal networks. Every alley, every streetlight, every abandoned building was mapped in her mind. Every decision she made now could mean the difference between capture and escape. Then her phone buzzed. Detective Ramirez. "Chief," he said, voice tight. "We found something." Surveillance from 2 blocks over shows the suspects meeting someone, possibly their handler. "He hasn't been identified yet." Danielle's pulse quickened. "Send me the feed." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The ride across the city was a blur of headlights and rain-slicked streets. Every car that passed made her flinch, every shadow seemed alive. But fear was no longer her companion's strategy was. She parked her car a block away from the location, stepping out into the cold air. The alley stretched before her, narrow and dark, with trash bins and graffiti-covered walls. From the shadows, she watched the 2 thugs appear, huddled and whispering. Danielle's heart rate was steady. Her training kicked in. Calm observation, positioning, timing. She followed, staying in cover, silent, calculating. They led her to a warehouse at the edge of the industrial district, a place that reeked of dust and rust. The taller one knocked twice on the metal door. It creaked open. Danielle hid behind a stack of crates, listening. Inside, a man's voice, deep, commanding, unseen, spoke. "Did you get it?" The taller one nodded, holding up a small leather bag. "Yeah, but the woman?" "She was tricky." The unseen man laughed low and cold. "Tricky won't matter. She'll stay out of your way next time." Or else. Danielle's eyes narrowed. That voice. Someone with power. Someone who knew her or wanted to intimidate her before she even realized it. She stepped back silently, her plan forming. First, she needed proof. Cameras, witness statements, timing. Then she would dismantle their operation methodically, like the chessboard she always imagined in her mind. As she exited the warehouse, rain dripping from her hair, she allowed herself a small, grim smile. They thought they had scared her. They didn't know that the woman they targeted was more dangerous than anyone they could imagine. And for the first time since the robbery, Danielle allowed herself to feel the pulse of anticipation, the first spark of her justice. She would make them regret ever crossing her path. By evening, she was back at her apartment, mapping out the next steps. She had sketches, notes, and a list of contacts. Her apartment became a war room. She called Ramirez again. "I want teams watching every exit, every alley, every known hideout. No one moves without our knowledge. And keep it quiet, no press, no department gossip." "Understood, Chief," Ramirez said, his voice tense with worry and awe. Danielle hung up. Alone in her apartment, the city lights casting fractured patterns on her walls, She felt a rare mix of fear and exhilaration. The night had taken her peace, but it had given her purpose. She poured a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and stared at the streets she had sworn to protect. Somewhere out there, the men who had tried to rob her were plotting, unaware that the law they mocked was already on their heels. Danielle's hand rested on her badge, hidden in her drawer. She whispered to herself, "I see you, and I'm coming." The rain continued to fall, washing the streets, but not the guilt, the chaos, or the fear that clung to them. She allowed herself one final moment of calm, letting her mind race through every possible scenario, every plan of attack. By dawn, she would have a strategy. By dusk, the first move would be made. And somewhere in the dark city, two young men were about to learn that the person they thought they could intimidate was the most formidable force they would ever encounter.